Steve Clayton, Chief Storyteller for Microsoft. Welcome to the LiveTiles Love Your Work Festival.
It's great to be here, Chris. Good to see you again.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. Thanks again for joining me. Now, you are, of course, the Chief Storyteller for Microsoft, which, as you know, I believe is one of the world's greatest job titles. I want to tell you a little story about this week in the car with my young daughter as we're driving to work, and she's asking me, "What are you up to this week, Daddy?" And I was like, I'm talking to Steve Clayton on a video conference. He's a Chief Storyteller for Microsoft. And you could sort of see the look in her face was like, you know, what is that? And her brain was ticking over. And then she came back to me and said, "Dad, does that Steve guy, does he go around to offices around the world and talk to people on the mat and read them a story?" And I was like, I can just imagine you there with CIOs on the floor in front of you reading this story about this is what Microsoft is up to.
That's exactly how it is. It's exactly how it is. It's like Jack and Ori back when I was in the UK. You know, it gets to 4 o'clock or whatever it was, 4:30, and it's like, all right, children, sit around. It's time for a story.
Time for a story. I love it. Just the simple childlike view of the world was fantastic. It is an awesome role, I believe, but I've got to ask you, do you love your work?
I do. I often say to people that most days I feel like I get paid to do my hobby. So, you know, if you get to that point in your career where most days you're getting up and you're excited to go to work, that's how I feel. You know, not all days are like that. There's no doubt there are some more difficult days and some more challenging things, but it wouldn't be fun if you didn't have that element as well, if it was all plain sailing. But yeah, I have an incredible job that has found me, really is how it went. And I'm very happy to be doing it every day.
I think there was a famous philosopher from your part of the world called Macklemore who said something along the lines of find something that you love and do it every day and it's not a job. So that feels to me like what you're up to.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I have this, a great friend of mine is Hugh McLeod, who's a cartoonist, who's sort of the internet's cartoonist in some ways, and very much his philosophy as well. A few of the cartoons I have of his that are framed in my office, back in my real office. And, they sort of share that philosophy of, you know, if you can find something that you really enjoy doing and you can make it your job, then you'll never, in theory, work another day in your life because you're getting paid to do your hobby.
So what gets you out of bed every day and into the real working world?
Right now, what gets me out of bed every day is getting on my bike. But getting into the working world is just, you know, the arena that Microsoft operates in is vast. The amount of people around the world who use our products and technologies for just a wide variety of different things, right? Everything from, you know, kids who are at school writing a letter or using Flipgrid or using Teams to collaborate right now, to, you know, governments who are using our technology to help with, you know, coping with the pandemic right now, to healthcare workers, to just every sort of walk of life is using Microsoft technology. So what gets me out of bed is this job that my team and I have, which is to go and shine a light on the things that people are doing with our technologies to hopefully change the world and make it a better place.
You mentioned your team there, your employees. How do you help them to love their work?
I think by giving them this sort of arena that they can play in that invites them to take risks is a big part of it. You know, a lot of what we've done, I think some of the best work we've done over the last 7 or 8 years has been where we've challenged ourselves to say, let's go try something different, and explored whether it's different storytelling tools or different types of storytelling, or frankly, even just getting into this so-called own storytelling business, which we did about 7 years ago. And so a big part of my job is, you know, giving them the tools, but really more this environment to say, let's go and continue to push the boundaries and take risks to do great storytelling.
Look, obviously the pandemic has thrown the world into a real spin, with lockdown and work from home completely changing our working lives. As Microsoft Chief Storyteller, you pretty much hold the Microsoft narrative in the palm of your hand. What were your initial thoughts when, you know, you realised that we were going into this global lockdown?
Well, I think my initial thoughts were we're in a very fortunate position as a company and as a team and as a set of individuals. So, you know, the vast majority of my team, and certainly I could very quickly switch to working from home, have the technology, most days have the bandwidth to be able to not, you know, completely continue as normal, but to not miss too many beats. You know, it's a very different environment for us to work in. So that was sort of my initial reaction was, well, this is going to be a change. But, many of us sort of were working a little bit from home occasionally anyway. So it was taking a piece of what we did and making it a permanent thing. And so there's a lot of loss that comes with that as well. And then, very quickly after that was realizing that, our company had a huge role to play in many different ways around whether it was other organizations like ours who were shipped into a complete virtual working, or whether it was working with, healthcare providers or local governments, or, people who needed technology to be able to try and create vaccines. And so we immediately saw and sort of rallied the team around, let's go and tell a set of stories around things that we are doing that are specifically a reaction to and in support of, people trying to cope with the pandemic.
So how exactly did you spin all those thoughts into that narrative?
I wouldn't say we necessarily had a narrative, because I think a narrative, you sort of know the story, and I think nobody quite knows where the story is going, right? Where it's going to end. And so it was less about saying what's the narrative and more saying, as an example, one of the stories we heard about really early on, Microsoft has a large campus here in Seattle where I'm based, which is very much like a large university. There's about 50,000 people who typically are coming to that workplace on a daily basis. And there's lots of cafeterias to feed those people. And so within the first few days, there was this realization of like, wow, we have all of this food that is now not going to be used, and we have some options. We can just throw it away and it's going to be wasted, which wouldn't be great. Or we have all this food that we've ordered, because you order 2 or 3 weeks ahead, so we have this supply chain that's bringing food into our cafeterias. And so a group of people in our cafeteria group, we call it real estate and facilities, they in a very entrepreneurial way said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to create box lunches for local school kids. Because we also live in an environment, like many of us do, where unfortunately lots of kids, for some kids, the only meal they get is when they go to school, or that's when they get a substantial meal. And so it's like, how can you use the resources that you have as a company? And so we heard about that story and we rallied around pretty quickly. We brought together a writer on my team, a couple of photographers that we work with, and we went and took a look at this operation. And within a week, it was literally like just this well-oiled operation. You went in, there was, lines of people. There were giant pallets of food, bananas and cookies, and all this sort of rigor and discipline around how do you get these things into a series of box lunches. And I think it was like 5,000 boxed lunches per day they were shipping out by 9 o'clock. That were then distributed out to the school districts, who then put them on school buses, who then delivered them to the kids out in the regions. And so there were lots of stories like that of these, heroic efforts by people inside of the company, but also heroic efforts of people outside of the company. And so we have this, group of very talented storytellers, some of whom are writers, some are editors, people we work with who are illustrators, with videographers. And we said, how do we sort of, marshal that team around telling this set of stories about people doing amazing things in response to the crisis?
Ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly why I've invited Steve on for a chat today. What an amazing story, mate. That is just fantastic. So inspiring, so inspiring. Look, it's not the first time that Microsoft would have been commended for their actions during the COVID-19 outbreak. You jumped into action pretty early on in terms of protecting the employees and their jobs and their roles with you. Was it important for you as a global tech company and as a leader in the industry to be seen to be doing the right thing very early on? I
think it was less about that, Chris, and more just it was seen to be doing the right, our number one job is to protect our employees. Yep. And unfortunately, the first outbreak, the first recorded outbreak of COVID was in a city called Kirkland, which is about 4 miles from where I live. Yep. And it's about 1.5 miles from where our campus is. And for me personally, two of one of my neighbors, both of them, the husband and wife in that household, they both work at Evergreen, literally where the outbreak was, and so it hit home for me very quickly. Yep. And as an employer, our first response was, well, how do we help our employees? And actually, it sort of started before that as well, because the outbreak obviously began in China. And as a global company, we had a set of measures that we were taking in China in terms of people working from home and, wearing masks and all of the careful considerations you need to take into place. So there was a lot of insight we'd already gained from China that we were able to apply very quickly here. And then we also have, a group of people within our company who are very well connected to sort of I'll call it the civic leadership within Seattle. So connected to the local government. There's a lot of intelligence and insight in Seattle. We've obviously got the Gates Foundation here. Bill is still very connected to the company. You've got the University of Washington right here, a few miles away from where I live, and they have a very strong capability around, infectious diseases and dealing with respiratory diseases. So in some ways, as terrible as it sounds, it was almost fortunate that it was in Kirkland because you have this community of people who are able to rally around very quickly and offer this leadership to say, hey, we're literally gonna move to working from home as quickly as we could, and then other companies in the region who we work with and we talk with on things like this, like Amazon, local company, Boeing, big local company, Starbucks, big local company, T-Mobile, big local company. So you have this collection of leaders who all had an opportunity to show leadership, and many of them did. And so I guess in answer to your question, it was less about being seen as hey, we're going to signal what everybody else should do, but more about how do we react very quickly to protect our employees, and then how do we marshal the resources we've got as a company, to help combat the pandemic.
Ethics and values, something really key to the way Microsoft drives the company, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the last 6 or 7 years of the company, there's been this big body of work that I've been fortunate to be very involved in, just around how do we evolve the culture of the company, and thinking a lot about our values. We've talked a lot about that inside of the company over the last few years. We talk a lot about how do we build trust in technology and therefore trust in Microsoft as a company. So it's it's at the heart of what we do.
Something else you also did was made Microsoft Teams available globally for free, which sort of helped with that transition for people from working in the office to working from home. How did you spin, or not so much spin, but how did you control that narrative? Because there would have been many cynics out there that would have taken the opposite view of that and said, oh, well, you're being a little bit opportunistic, as opposed to really wanting to help and do the right thing.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon all of us as technology leaders, and it wasn't just us. Other companies did similar things, and also it's terrible to say it, but we've had experiences like this in the past, whether it's during natural disasters like hurricanes or earthquakes, when access to communications becomes a life-saving capability, and so things like we've done in the past around how do we make Skype calling free. So we've got experience of how to do this, and I think experience in how to show people that this isn't something that we're just doing as to take advantage of a situation. It's based on our principles of what we want to do as a company. We've got past history of doing these kinds of things, and fortunately we've got the wherewithal and the capability. I mean, there's no question it also drove a huge amount of innovation, because it put an enormous amount of pressure on teams and the infrastructure, the data centers, the networks behind that to drive a faster pace of innovation as well.
Look, I guess at the end of the day, people will make their own mind up, but what you actually did was really facilitate that whole work from home revolution, if you like. I think it's something like 80 million odd daily users on Teams now. So, really during a difficult time, you helped to keep the business world running, didn't you?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate that we have one of the technologies that people see that can enable them to do that. And so, it gives me a lot of pride when my kids who now get up in the morning and they do virtual schooling and they log on to Teams, or they use Flipgrid. And it's not Teams is a big piece of it, but there are a whole set of other technologies. Like Flipgrid is this amazing technology that we acquired a few years ago, and I'd not played with it much, and then I started playing with it with my kids, and it's just super cool. Like really, really cool way to engage kids in particular. But Teams was at the heart of it for sure. And then some of the things that we've done recently, like the introduction of Together Mode in Teams, I think is just fascinating. This ability to, instead of having the so-called Brady Bunch or 9x9 window, whatever it is, you have this classroom type view. So there's some really, really cool stuff that's come out of it as well.
Yeah, no, it was excellent. I know for myself, when my daughter was doing the schooling from home thing, I had more than a few calls from her teacher asking for a little bit of help on how to set up Teams. So that was great.
Yeah.
that together mode, was that what you used in the NBA Finals?
Yeah, it was actually. It's a friend of mine who pioneered that. So there's a guy at Microsoft called Jaron Lanier, who is, a lot of people don't know Jaron works at Microsoft, but this guy is basically the father of virtual reality. He literally coined the term many, many years ago. And he's a prolific author. He's an amazing speaker. He is a phenomenal musician, just an incredible guy. And Jaron has spent a lot of time over the last 20 or 30 years trying to figure out how do you mediate in as natural way as you can conversations through technology. And he's played with lots of different technologies, from holographic technologies to virtualization, 3D technologies. And he was sort of one of the pioneers behind Together Mode. And it was just cool to see him involved in it, because I think he's just a fascinating character, and also applied a lot of brain science to it. So he conducted a whole body of research around, this feels good, but there is actually scientific evidence around using that mode is less stressful on the brain than using the more traditional, video mode that we have. And then, that was picked up and used in the NBA to create this crowd-like experience, which is very cool as well.
I think, in my personal opinion, if it hadn't have been for that, the NBA Finals wouldn't have been as great as they were this year. For those that didn't see it, there was basically big screens around the court with all of these together modes sort of strewn around the court, and that was the crowd. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, super cool. I mean, it's we're now at the point, at least in the UK, I read, I'm from the UK originally and following the football. And just this weekend, they're going to allow limited crowds to go back and to start to watch the game. So there's no replacing the real live crowd, but Together Mode was a really cool way to do it for the NBA Finals.
Fantastic. Let's change tack a little bit now. Let's talk about some of the stories. And I just want to play this quick video to everybody just to show you a little bit about what you actually do for the Microsoft narrative.
Where does inspiration come from? Where does innovation begin? Where does the future really start? Our story began in a dorm room in 1975 on a strip of paper. And from there, a vision was born. We designed technology to build, technology to grow, technology to learn, explore, and create. And we turned a world of possibility into a world of reality. But no journey is without obstacles, and our challenges only encouraged us to go further. This is a new chapter. With new frontiers, new possibilities, new obstacles, and a renewed passion and vision to face them all.
It is our mission to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more.
One of the things I love about what you do is the way that you're able to find these fantastic stories from all the different corners of the globe. I'm sure that during the pandemic, there were so many stories that were coming through to you. Can you think of any that maybe made you laugh or cry or maybe restore your faith in humanity somewhat?
I think, that one I talked about earlier on was a really special story, because I got the chance to literally go and see it and see this group putting together these, boxes of food. And it sort of made you laugh, or maybe laugh's not the right word, but it made me smile, because it's like just the ingenuity of a group of people to say, we're not going to let this food go to waste. But then also the just the logistical expertise around it. But then it sort of makes you cry as well, because it's like, in this day and age, you've got kids who are that's in some days the only significant meal they're going to get during the day, so it sort of makes you cry as well. But then there are other things just around the use of technology. So one of the use cases I saw most recently was doctors in Imperial College Hospital in the UK, actually, who were using HoloLens to be able to take people into wards. So obviously, when you've got people who are suffering from COVID, you want to be very restrictive about who is able to go into the room, and they're able to use HoloLens as almost like a teleportation technology to be able to allow people to go into the wards, but obviously remain safe. And so there are so many stories. There are a whole set of stories that we're working on around work that we're doing with some of the I would say sort of the biotech companies around how we're going to apply our technology at huge scale, like huge computing scale, to be able to go and sort of look at the genomics of COVID-19. And I'm certainly no scientist, but those stories around how we're using technology to go and help identify cures or vaccines, or how to use, things like convalescent plasma was a whole body of work that we did that was fascinating. So there's a lot of it. There are these, very human stories like the school meals. And then there are these amazing technology stories about here's how we're applying technology in an incredible way.
One of the great stories coming out of Australia was from one of your senior managers out here who couldn't work within the home anymore. He was disturbing the family too much. So he built himself this little office out in the back corner of his yard out of I think it was like an old refrigeration sort of container, so that it was all soundproofed and that sort of thing, with a great big window, and he could go and work from home any day he liked with this fantastic view of his backyard. It was just fantastic.
That's cool. The return of the potting shed is going to be one of the great outcomes of COVID-19.
I'm sure there are other great stories of your staff doing great things during this time. Overall, how did they cope with the whole working from home thing?
I think people have coped remarkably well. And I would say that there were a couple of elements to it. One is people have been able to adapt very quickly, and obviously, we were using Teams a lot anyway, but it enabled us to become power users of Teams, very, very quickly. And I would say the things that have really started to grow is, in the past, I would say people were using Teams for projects and for meetings or for virtual calls. Now there's much more collaboration I see on Teams, and even within calls. If I look at the calls that my team do, there is as much of the conversation that happens in the chat window as happens in the video windows now. And so people are really just getting very comfortable, being in that environment. But I think people are also recognizing that we have to change the way we work as well, because now we're all 6, 8, 9 months into this. It's clearly taken its toll on people, right? It's exhausting to sit in front of a screen for your entire day. And so being very intentional about taking breaks and getting outside. And we talked about that a lot in my team over the last few weeks, and literally had a behavioral psychologist come and talk to the team around how to deal with resiliency, and how you should think about just planning your workday, planning your week, thinking about your physical health, thinking about your mental health. And one of the areas where I do think we're doing more work as a company, and I think you'll see more of this over the next few months, is around how do you bring some of that mental health capability into the technology as well, and encourage people to take a break from technology, because the fatigue is real, right? We all get to the end of the day and we're burnt out. Yeah,
absolutely. We're thinking along the same lines here at LiveTiles with our LiveTiles Vibe product for sure. One of the things I think is really missing from the workplace now is those casual interactions, where you bump into each other at the water cooler, or when you're in the coffee room making a coffee. Those casual conversations don't seem to exist. Is there anything technology can do to help us with those?
I don't think technology can help, but it's never going to recreate them. And I think we've tried to recreate them within my team. So we have this thing every week. We have initially we did it 3 times a week, and now we do it once a week for 30 minutes to an hour, and we have a so-called optional hangout. There's no agenda. People are not obliged to show up, and they just show up. And if they do, we hang out and we chat about whatever we want to chat about that's not really work-related. And so that recreates it somewhat, but I think that's the big thing that a lot of us miss, right, is as Satya talked about this a few months ago in I think it was a New York Times piece, and he talked about how we're using up all the social capital that we built up between each other over the many years we've worked. That's what we're eating away at right now, is that social capital. That in many ways, lots of the work went on between the meetings. It was walking to the meeting with somebody, or leaving a meeting room, and you'd have a conversation or a follow up, or you bump into somebody that you didn't expect to, and you'd get a piece of information that you it sort of changed your day. And all we can do is try to artificially recreate those things. And then there are other things that we can do to help break up the day. So one of the things that we're doing, with Microsoft 365 is introducing this virtual commute, which the first time I heard it, I was like, what would I need a virtual commute for? But my commute to the office, right, and for many people, it was time when, for me, it's sort of 25 minutes in the morning, and then usually it was 35 or 40 minutes at the end of the day. But it was this time where I could prepare for my day, and then I could sort of finish my day and mentally decompress. And so we're going to be bringing in that type of capability into the technology to give these gentle nudges to people to say, hey, you might want to book out time, for yourself.
That's good. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Technology can help, but it's not, I don't think it's going to replace that personal connection.
So obviously the way forward seems to be more of this, what we've got here today, and less face-to-face. I'm just wondering, can you do your best work virtually? I know, you talked before about working with Satya. How do you go if you're trying to pitch him an idea and you can't see his reaction to you on his face, there in the room? Do you still get that same feeling being sent to you across a video chat, or is it a little bit more difficult for you?
I still get it from him. I can assure you of that. So when I'm pitching stuff to him, I'm pretty sure where I'm at with things. But I think it holds true for everybody, right? Is there are just it's difficult to read body language, to read, other signals that you would get in a meeting. If you're sat round a circular table, then you just get a sense of are people engaged? Are they leaning forward? Are they taking notes? Are they looking at something on their phone? And you can't really get that sense anywhere near as much in this type of environment. And you certainly can't get it if people switch their cameras off. And that, that's a whole sort of social discussion as well that I've had, less so with my team, but more with neighbors. We had this big discussion a few weeks ago. We sat in the garden, we're chatting about video cameras and saying, why would people not put them on? And some people, don't want to show you the insides of their house, or some people don't, want to protect their privacy, and I totally respect that. But without the cameras on, it creates another barrier. So it's tough.
Speaking of being outside, I know that you're a cyclist. We mentioned that a bit earlier, and I follow you on Instagram. I've seen lots of your photos from around the Seattle area when you're out and about on your bike. I'm just wondering, has this whole work from home setup allowed you to be pretty flexible in the way that you meet? And have you ever taken a Teams call on your bike?
I haven't taken a Teams call on my bike. I've been very tempted to listen into some Teams calls on my bike, just because, there are those calls where you do dial in to get information and listen versus participate. And there's one of those a week that I participate in. And to be honest, I've never really done it, mainly just from a safety point of view. I'm nervous about being on my bike and being distracted. But in terms of the flexibility, one of the things that I talk about it a lot with my team about being on my bike, and not because I'm trying to make them feel bad that I'm on my bike and they're not, but more to give them the permission to, to say, I will say, I'll have a 2:00 meeting and I'll say, I just got back from a bike ride, because I want to give people the permission to say, well, you don't have to do your bike ride at the start of day before work or at the end of day after work, because those boundaries have just changed, right? So you've got to plan your day around fitting these things in where you can. And if that means you say, I'm going to take 2 hours off in the afternoon, or I'm going to take Thursday afternoons off, or I'm going to, not work on a Friday morning, everybody's got to find their own way in this new world. And I think as leaders, the job for us is to model the right behaviors and to make people feel not guilty and feel comfortable about, planning the day as best they can.
One rule though, mate, please do not turn up to a Teams call in your full body lycra.
I will not be doing that.
We're the same here at LiveTiles. I've been doing walking the dog meetings. During winter, we had an everyday whip. So I'd walk the dogs until one day when I was walking down onto the boat ramp down near home, and it was icy, and I was on full video call walking down there, completely lost footing because it was all iced over, and landed flat on my back. After that, no more video while I'm walking. It's just purely audio.
Oh, it's tough.
Now, I just want to change approach a little bit again and talk about a story that's been doing the rounds of late since the pandemic began, and that was the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. It's been a worldwide hit, informative for some, but, maybe scaring the pants off some other people who didn't know maybe how the whole internet world kind of works. Even though the documentary doesn't talk about Microsoft directly, have you had to engage in discussions around it?
Not in a significant way, no. It's a topic that within the industry for sure is one that has been getting a lot more attention, and rightly so, I think, over the last couple of years. And I thought it was a fascinating documentary.
Yeah.
I mentioned Jaron earlier on. My friend Jaron features in it heavily, and he's been a very strong proponent of this whole approach of, being much more thoughtful about our use of social media, and in particular about how our data is used and who gets paid for our data. And he did a great TED talk on this 2 years ago at Open TED and was widely regarded as the best talk at TED that year. He wrote a book a year ago called 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Account Right Now. And I talk a lot with Jaron about this stuff. And frankly, it's changed my behavior on social media. I don't spend as much time on it. I am aware of, the mechanisms behind social media, and I've been trying to educate, my friends and family about it. But it's not something that we've been engaged in or have to be engaged in as much detail as a company. There are other companies who've certainly had a lot more scrutiny around it over the last few months than we have.
So where does Microsoft stand on some of the ethical points that were raised in the documentary then?
I think the fundamental thing is, trust is about building a trusting relationship with our customers and being transparent around their data and the use of their data, and specifically around the fact that their data is their data. And, we've been fortunate that things have come along, in particular GDPR a few years ago, that whilst it was, intended and as a body of law for European citizens, we decided to take on the requirements of GDPR and make them available to all of our customers. And so that put in a lot of requirements that we're happy to comply with around how your data is used, the transparency around where data is collected. But fundamentally, we build technology, we build services that we want people to trust, and we believe that they do. It's not something that we take for granted, and it's something we'll continue to do. But that's sort of the fundamental piece: is how do we ensure that we are operating in a way that continues to build trust and operating in a way that is transparent, in particular around customers' data and how it's used.
What about as a father? Was there anything in it that made you sort of think differently about the industry that you work in?
No differently than I already had, because it was as interesting as it was. It's something I've followed for a few years. And again, talking with Jaron and also another guy at Microsoft, a guy called Glenn Whale, who's an economist and thinks a lot about this stuff as well. And so it didn't really change my approach. It sort of more just emboldened me, and also just personally made me think more often about my own use of social media.
Yeah, it certainly made me think about it for sure.
I think the other thing I would add on to that is my kids are probably a little bit young to show them that. I'm not sure that they would understand all of the nuances of it. But at the point they are old enough, then I certainly will expose them to it, because I think that, they're getting close to being old enough to understanding that, these systems are designed to capture your attention. And it's something I talk a lot about in storytelling, funnily enough, is, the reason I think storytelling has risen so much in the last, 8 to 10 years has been this recognition of how do we capture people's, not just their attention, but their imagination. And right now our attention is being captured by these bright, flashy things very quickly that grab our attention. And I think it's why storytelling has become more prevalent in terms of engaging people in a much deeper way, rather than just, having this very fast attraction.
You're so right that in the last 8 to 10 years, the storytelling within the world, whether that be in the tech industry or other industries, has just gone to next level. And I think, mate, that perhaps what you've been doing at Microsoft is just a little piece of that, do you think?
I think so. We sort of got on that journey early and realized that we had, I've known for a long time, well before I started this job, that we've got incredible untold stories at this company about people, about inside of the company, about things that people outside of the company are doing with our technology. And, the media is not always going to want to tell those stories for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, sure.
And that's totally fine. So we sort of began this journey of storytelling in earnest about 7 or 8 years ago, because we recognized that and said we have a set of stories that we feel need to be told, and we're going to do them in a professional way.
Now, speaking of the external to Microsoft, they say that during times of crisis, that's the birth of innovation in some ways. Opportunities open up, and Microsoft is certainly at the front there, both in-house and with external partners and that sort of thing. What have you heard from the community of late about the startups that are doing great things during these tough times?
Well, I think startups is an area where we've invested a lot, I would say, in particular over the last 4 or 5 years. And, there's a great story that I know that you'd seen recently around Jeff Ma and the work that he's doing with startups. And obviously he's a product of that community, having bought 4 very successful startups himself, and is now leading our team that engages with startups. And I think it's an area where it was ripe landscape for us. It's just, somewhere where we have amazing technology, in particular with Azure, and particularly with our developer tools. Startups are often software startups, very much they're built on code, and we've got things like the world's most used software development tool in Visual Studio. We recently, or a couple of years ago, acquired GitHub, which is where most developers are now creating their work. So we have this incredible set of assets, and then you add on to that our cloud services, you add on things like our cognitive services, you add on just the expertise, frankly, that we can bring to that community. And it's a landscape full of opportunity for us that isn't just in Silicon Valley as well. I think that's one of the things that sometimes frustrates me, is this common, misperception that all innovation happens in Silicon Valley. And even the fact that Silicon Valley is used as this sort of catch-all term to include Seattle, and Seattle isn't in Silicon Valley last time I looked. And so, innovation happens all over the world. Some of the greatest innovations I've seen in the last 5 years are coming out of, the continent of Africa, and just the amount of software developers who are coming through the education system, the ingenuity that they have, So it's, this sort of classic phrase of the talent is evenly distributed, but the opportunity is not. And I think a big job for us is how do we more evenly distribute that opportunity around software development and startups?
At the moment, the future is a little uncertain while we wait for this vaccine for things to get back to the new normal, as we keep saying. But, there are exciting opportunities that are coming up. What is exciting you about the future of Microsoft and what they might provide for, us out in the user community?
There's a lot of things. I mean, one of the beauties of my job is I get to just talk to so many people doing incredible things inside of the company, just amazing stuff with HoloLens. And I look at the work that we're doing there and how that has the potential to transform meetings in particular. So I think that will be a fascinating area to watch. One of the areas of technology I've watched for probably the last 4 or 5 years and worked closely with is the team who are working on quantum computing. And that's sort of, the next big frontier for computing in many ways. And it's a very competitive environment with ourselves and Google and IBM and a number of others who are chasing this quest to build a scalable quantum computer. And I feel very optimistic about the work that our team is doing there. And then the impact that will have, I think, people they haven't really got their head around it yet, of the ability that will have to be able to have a computer that is powerful enough to be able to model the physical world down at the molecular level in a way that we've never been able to do before. And so it starts to provide us with a technology that can really go after the biggest challenges on the planet around global warming and around how do you get carbon out to the atmosphere? How do you reduce the amount of water that's used in farming, or the amount of pesticides that are created that have a detrimental effect on the environment? And so the potential for that technology in particular, I think, is the one that I would say I'm most excited about.
Yeah, there are some fantastic stories about that on your website right now, aren't there?
Yeah, we've done a ton of work trying to explain quantum because it's not the easiest subject. And so everything from 4 or 5 years ago, we did this really cool animated chalkboard, like a classic green chalkboard from a school with white chalk on that sort of explained. It was, a 101 on quantum computing. And if you want to understand quantum, it remains one of the best sort of mini tutorials. But I should also say, one of the areas, or one of our labs doing some of the most important work around quantum is in Australia. We have a couple of different locations that are really pioneering our quantum work, and one of them is in your neighborhood.
Just writing myself a note here to go and get up to speed on quantum computing via that video. So, mate, just to round this whole chat out here today, it's been fantastic talking to you. Maybe you could just leave us with some thoughts on how we, as users of Microsoft, can use your products to help us love our work even further.
That's a great question. How can you use the products? Well, hopefully people are using the products and loving them. One of the,
yes.
I will tell you, just going back to that quantum discussion, right? One of the things I really love about Microsoft, and I talk about this internally, is the spectrum of innovation. And if you think about HoloLens, or you think about, my lovely new Surface Duo device here, things like that.
Nice product placement, mate.
Yes. Or you think about quantum computing, and you think about the work we're doing on AI, and that's breakthrough innovation. But some of the things I love are what I call everyday innovation. And they're just these little delightful things in our software in places that I find them wonderful. So, in PowerPoint, we added this AI-powered piece of technology over a year ago now called PowerPoint Designer. And if you're not a great PowerPoint designer, which I'm not, it helps you create beautiful PowerPoint slides. One of the things that we added into Teams recently was, transcription. Translation is in there as well. And, it's just, we sort of take it for granted now that we can just turn on live transcription, and there it is, or transcription across the bottom of the screen. Super cool. Two other things that I will tell you, these are going to sound incredibly trivial, but I use both of them every single day. Is if you're inside of a Microsoft product like Outlook or Word, if you press the Windows key and period, or Windows key and full stop, you get this little window that pops up with this set of emojis.
I love it. I use it every day.
Every day. And it's just like this delightful little thing it's just magic.
My young daughter showed me how to do that.
Well, exactly. Like the kids live on emojis, right? But I think a lot more of us do now in this world we're conversing in that's virtual. And then the other thing I do, I have fortunate enough to have multiple different screens that I work from at home, and two different PCs, actually. And a few years ago, we released this piece of technology called Mouse Without Borders, and I'd forgotten about it. And so I had, in my office, I have a computer set up here that I'm talking to you on, and I have another computer off to the right that has a separate keyboard and mouse, which is just kind of a pain, right? Because you keep getting confused about which mouse and keyboard to use. And then I remember this piece of software called Mouse Without Borders, which basically virtualizes your mouse across up to, I think, 4 different screens, your mouse and your keyboard. And so I now have this mouse that it spans this expansive screens in my office. It's unbelievably cool. And it's free. You just download it and install it. It's incredibly easy to use. And so as much as I love stuff like quantum and stuff like our, devices and Surface and HoloLens is amazing, I love stuff like that as well, because it just makes me smile, those little things.
I have to say, as a podcaster, thank you very much for the Word 365 transcription service that's now available. That is fantastic.
Yeah, that is pretty damn handy.
It is so clever, so clever. Steve Clayton, as always, mate, thank you so much for joining me and just sharing some of the Microsoft world with us. It's always fantastic to talk to you. You always leave me with a sense of a wonderment about what you do at Microsoft, and it's just great to hear the stories. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Love Your Work Festival.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chris. Always good to chat with you, mate.
Cheers, mate.